And so intimacy with God, look what the Lord offers them. I mean, these dead people. You have a few names in Sardis who have not defiled their garments, and they will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. Wow, Jesus says to this church, this dead church, there's a few of you who are not dead, and you're going to walk with me. You're going to walk through life radiating my love. And he who overcomes, now he's talking about heaven, he who overcomes will be clothed in white garments, and I will not blot. What? Did you read that verse? I know you're going to, because you have to read the whole book to get 10 points, I think. I would read it just for the blessing of it, but we have to read it as our assignment. But look what it says. I will not blot out his name from the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. By the way, what is the book of life? The book of life is the eternal record of those confessed by Christ before his Father. I mean, we don't have to be mystical about it. It says it right there. I will not take his name out of the book of life. What's the book of life? I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. The book of life has the names of all those people that either when Jesus walks them through the valley of the shadow of death when they die, or when they're taken in a moment in the twinkling of the eye at the last trump in the rapture, and they're presented as one of God's children that Jesus bought and paid for. That's who's in the book of life. That's all the Bible tells us about the book of life. Everybody wants to know what the Bible doesn't tell us. That's what all the controversies are. Why don't we just stick with what it says and not waste our time in the white spaces? The black print, what does it say? It says the book of life is the eternal record of God's family confessed by Christ. Now, each of the times the book of life appears, there's a different explanation about it. But what does the one ahead of it say? I will not blot out his name. That's where all the people say, oh, some are going to lose their salvation. Well, wait a minute. If I went back a slide, up here, there was the name of a church. What was the name of the church? Sardis. Did you know that the king of Sardis, before the Romans took over Sardis, used to have a terrible thing about him? He had citizens of that kingdom, but if they were not nice to him, he would blot them out of the registry of citizens. So there's a historic context for every verse of the Bible, especially the ones that are hard to understand. And people go, that's why we know we can lose our salvation, because it says in verse 5 that those people he didn't blot out, but I might get blotted out. No, Jesus doesn't say I'm going to blot you out. He says I will not blot you out. What he's saying is people that are in Christ cannot lose their salvation. It doesn't say you might lose your salvation. He said, I will not. Where do we get all the controversy? From the white spaces. Not from what it says. Jesus says, I will not. What he's saying is, I will not be like your former king of your kingdom that was capricious. And even though you were citizens, he unjustly, unlawfully blotted you out. I would never do that. He's already said a lot of I will nevers. He says, whoever believes in me will never perish. Whoever believes in me will never hunger. Whoever believes in me will never thirst. Whoever believes in me will never die. Not just perish, die. Wow. So Jesus offers intimacy, but we have to watch out for sin and Satan. See what it says at the, he overcomes will be clothed in white garments. I won't blot his name out. He who has an ear, though, let him hear what the Spirit says. Listen to my warning. Hate sin. Avoid all the problems the devil causes. Bonnie and I were serving at another one of the conferences with doctors, and I was preaching away. My message that time was on spiritual warfare, and I actually had on the screens the seven signs of how to know you're struggling with bitterness. And I was going through those, and I was teaching along, and I did the whole conference for these. I didn't know anybody. I mean, Bonnie and I flew in, spent 2 weeks. There were hundreds of them. We met a few dozen personally, and I taught. But I'd never met any of them before I taught them. They're all medical doctors, many of them from the Mayo Clinic, many of them from Boston General, many of them from Cleveland Clinic. They had given up their practices in America, earning in the six figures, in other words, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and went to little tiny mission stations where they used antiquated, cast-off Goodwill equipment, that was brought over, and served people, many of whom weren't even interested in Christianity at all. And so that's what a very difficult job they had. So I was teaching along, and at the end of the week, one of the doctors, and you always told the doctors, they can't stand to not be wearing those scrubs. Those scrubs, they kind of look like green pajamas, and they wear those like Crocs, or those little baggies over them. Have you ever seen the kind they wear in the hospital? At this conference, I just taught them for 1 hour in the morning. All the rest of the day, they were being trained in the latest technology and medical techniques by an entire faculty that came from the Mayo Clinic. So Bonnie and I were the spiritual speakers, and all these Christian doctors from the Mayo Clinic in Rochester and in Scottsdale and in Jacksonville, Florida, were teaching them how to be better doctors on the mission field. So it's a wonderful setup, and it's exciting to be a part of it. But one of them in their scrubs, he even had the little baggies on his feet, came walking up to me in the hall and said, just wanted to tell you what happened. I said, where? He said, in my hospital. And he said, in the session this week. I said, okay. He said, I'm from, and he named the field. It's a Muslim country. He said, I'm in a hospital, and I've devoted my life. He was like in his late 40s, early 50s. He said, I've devoted my life to this hospital. Franklin Graham paid $5 million for the hospital, and all these other missions brought in doctors, and they're supported by churches all over the country. And he said, we have this unreached people group area, and we have this hospital. And he said, everything's going great, and people are translating the Bible, and we're evangelizing, and I'm doctoring. And he said, then we invited an American church to come over and help us, because we're so busy doctoring that the buildings need painting, some of the bathrooms don't work, and he named all the things. So this American church sent over this large team to paint and plumb and everything else. And he said, one of the big things they did for us is they brought over a child care group so that all of us could reconnect with our husbands and wives, and we could spend time. We're always doing everything. We're doctoring and take care of the kids. And he said, while that group was there, my little 2-year-old daughter came home and said, Daddy, the bad man touched me. And he went, the bad man touch you? And talked to his 2-year-old, and there was a pedophile, a child abuser, who somehow had gotten on the church's mission team, however, we don't know, and went and abused this doctor's 2-year-old sweet little daughter. What happened from that is that doctor got so angry at God. He said, I gave up everything to serve you, and you let that pedophile abuse my daughter. Then he got mad after God at his wife. Why did you let her go to the child care? His wife. Then he got mad at all the other doctors. Why weren't you watching my daughter? You understand what I mean? It just cascaded. He got angry at God, his wife, his coworkers. So you know what he did? He decided he's shutting the hospital. He was the only surgeon, and the only thing that kept him there was he could do any surgery on any of these very poor, rural, desperate people. And he said, I quit. And he came to the conference to announce to the mission, because that's what they do at the conference. They're trained, plus all the missions are there, and you kind of negotiate with them how many more years you're going to serve in that mission post. And he said he had his resignation letter and everything, and he said in the first session, he said, by the way, I had to go to the sessions. I wasn't listening. He said, I went to the session with my arms crossed looking at the floor. And I thought, I have to sit through another sermon. And he said, then you announced, I looked up and you announced the 7 signs of bitterness. And he thought, well, that's nothing I need to see. And he said he was looking at the floor at his Crocs. And he said, and by the second point, he looked up and he thought, is that me? Am I bitter? By the third point, he said, this was the climactic moment he told me about. He turned And he looked at his wife, and now remember, there's 600 or 700 doctors all in this auditorium. So they're all sitting, and he turns to his wife next to him, and he says, he mouthed the words, "Is that me?" His wife was there and told me. She said, "I was frozen." He looked at me and pointed at the screen and said, "Is that me? Am I bitter like that?" And she said, "I thought, if I say yes, he'll be explosively angry. That's what he's been for the last year. Everything I say, he blows up and blames and gets so mad at me. If I say no, he'll probably stay like he has been, explosive and angry and quitting everything." So she said, "I didn't know what to do." And she said, "I just prayed and said, 'Lord, help.'" And then his wife turned and looked right at him and said, "That is you." What a good wife. He said in that instant, he said, "By the way, I didn't hear the rest of your sermon." He said, "I was so crushed by the Spirit of God and by the Word of God and by the truth of God." He said, "I bowed," and he said, "I just cried out to the Lord. I spent the rest of whatever you said telling the Lord how wrong I was, how sorry I was, how much I asked him to cleanse and forgive me of being angry at him, of being angry at my wife. He said of being angry that it was my daughter and not somebody else's that got abused, and me getting angry at all my coworkers, and me trying to give the devil a victory by closing down the only evangelistic center in that whole country for those unreached peoples groups." Why did I tell you that? Because that incredible missionary doctor, who most people would have heard speaking at their church, thinking he walked on water, thinking he was akin to the Apostle Paul, someone that risked their life, gave up hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars of the American good life, of lived in a closed country that was so hard to live in, so dark, so desperate. But Satan knew that if he could get him infected with bitterness, which by the way is a sin. In fact, Ephesians 4, where I took you a couple days ago when we talked about the church at Ephesus, do you know what it said? It says, "Grieve not the Spirit of God." Do you know what it says in the verse just for it? "Don't be bitter." Do you know what the closest word to grieving and quenching the Spirit of God is in the scriptural context? Bitterness. What is bitterness? Being angry at your parents, being angry at your husband, being angry at your wife, being angry at your brother or sister, or your boss, or your coach, or your co-workers, or your fellow students, that they did something they probably don't even know they did to you, but you hold it against them, and it makes a little tiny hole in your armor, and Satan starts sending in the infection. And you start blaming everything on everybody, getting angry at God, getting angry at everything. Sin has consequences.